currently been doing a nationwide tour of museums of North America, measuring every single MPID he can find, and is currently working on some very interesting stuff on trails flycatchers. I think he might give us a quick sneak peek of that before we hang up and see if anybody has any questions.
That's right. Thanks, Andy. And yeah, we'll end with this. This is a hint of, I guess, what's to come in Volume 3 that Andy and I are working on. Volume 3 will have components in there that are dedicated to bird banders. So we are actually going to be looking at primary or wing formulas and primary tip spacings in great detail. And in part motivated by what Andy showed in terms of the primary tip spacings for tropical and couches and western and cassins, we thought we might as well go and measure all these for the MPIDs. And we already knew that there are some differences. For example, Hammond's has a very wide gap in its primary spacings, and yellow-bellied has a wide gap. But we thought we better do it systematically. And in the process of doing that, we found that maybe we've got something that will help us in identifying willow and alder. So this is a sneak look at that. And this figure just shows you what we mean by primary tip spacing. So when the wing is folded, the tips of the primaries are shown right here, and the spacings is just the distance between two adjacent tips or whatever tips you're interested in. In Pidanax, P10 and P9 are always hidden. That's why they're dashed on the folded wing. And P8 tends to just barely peek out. Sometimes it doesn't peek out, so it shows or doesn't show. So the most significant one that shows is typically P7, and then you go 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2 and 1 typically are hidden beneath the secondaries. And so we measured all of these spacings, and I'm just going to show you willow and alder. And this is a quick summary of what these are Andy's plates here. And these two birds look almost identical. And in Volume 1, we even put them together. We think visually in terms of the plumage contrasts and structure that we can identify willow and alder, even if they're silent, maybe 80% of the time. It's very much like the couch's tropical problem. But you, of course, always want to verify with call. But we didn't want to give anyone the impression that with all these field marks that we had suggested that can help you identify a silent flycatcher, that to get too confident in separating alder and willow out there. That's why we put them together, if you saw our book. But in Volume 3, we will separate them because we now believe they can be very reliably distinguished, even if you don't have the call, if you put all these field marks together. And one of the most important things is this primary tip. And so in alder, P7, P6 here is longer than P6, P5. And it's reversed in willow. P6, P5 is longer than P7. It's a very subtle thing. But the differentiation between the two happens to be right at the equal, where they're exactly the same. And so you might not be able to, you might not believe that you can see the difference, but the human eye can see if your picture frame is on the wall and off by 1 degree, you see that. You may not be able to tell me that's 1 degree, but you see it's off. And I think we'll go through here and show you that it can be seen. But these are traditionally, we've been using these complicated wing formulas to identify willow and alder when they're banded. And there's a lot of overlap actually in the wing formula that we are currently using. And there's a lot of measurements that you have to make. And one of the problems with willow and alder is that the differences are less than a millimeter. And so if you have some measurement error, it may be more not the wing formula that makes it difficult to separate. But here, what you can see is, so the absolute length of P6, P5, and P7, P6, they all kind of have significant overlap, but they do separate out into two clusters, and you can draw these lines. These are basically the slopes here, and this is the one-to-one line. There's some overlap, and you have a histogram here, and you'll see willow flycatchers have the higher 6.5 to 7.6 ratio. So we got away from looking at absolutes, but looking at ratios. And the importance of doing ratios is you don't need a ruler out in the field. You can just take the picture, or you take the picture of a banded bird, you can go back home and make the measurement on your computer or print it out and use a ruler then. It's just the relatives. You don't need the absolute scale. So while there is overlap, it turns out it's like 90% of willow flycatchers fall to the right of this differentiation line, 1.035, and 90% of the alder flycatchers fall onto this side. So unfortunately, there's still a small percentage that is a bit equivocal, but this is the best I think we've seen in terms of some sort of wing morphometric index for identification. And so we actually just submitted this to Western Birds. So hopefully you'll see it out at some point. But there's a scorecard with different morphometrics. This one, 6.576, is the most important one because the one that you can see and visualize the easiest in the field and in photos. And then these ones you actually do have to measure. I won't get into those details, but when you put this whole combination together, you actually are pretty good in identifying or separating silent trails flycatchers. And all of these can be seen on a photographed bird if the wings are folded. And I'll give you some examples here of its application. This is a alder on the left and a willow on the right, and the Andes labeled 765 here. You can see that the 7.6 gap, this terminal one, is distinctly longer than the 6.5. And then here, it's a little bit more subtle, but certainly 7.6 is not longer than 6.5. It's actually it's the reverse. And here are some images of banded birds from the East Coast this fall. You have here this is a alder over here. The 7.6 is just a tad bit longer than the 6.5. And then here's a classic willow. And you can see from other features actually already giving you an idea that it might be a willow, a longer, thicker bill. This one's a little turned, but indistinct eye ring and dull wing bars, and overall of a lighter colored bird, whereas this has a dark ground color to the wings. So already other features hint at alder and willow, but these things kind of take the message right home. And I'll show you some photos here. These are willows. This one is a extimus, the southwestern willow, and then this is the dominant one out in the east. And Andy's blown up these images here to see here 6.5 is wide compared to 6.7, wide compared to 6.7, classic willow. But in the case of extimus, you can already see that long bill, that dull upper wing bar. Even here, the wing bar is not very strong, and it's a fairly light colored, no eye ring, maybe a hint of eye ring here, but pretty diffuse and fuzzy looking. And then you go to alder. These are some Texas birds. They're all passing through Texas right now. And the 6.7. So here, this is 8. 8 sticks out a little bit more in alder than in willow. But the one you want to focus on is 6.7 being longer than 6.5. Same thing. This one's extreme. This is a juvenile bird here. But the wing bars are quite bold. In fact, alder looks a little bit more to me, plumage-wise, it looks more like a least flycatcher. And so that's what you have to worry about out here. But you can see all the other features. That crisp eye ring checks off as alder as well compared to willow. But the wingtips really are the ones that make it even more diagnostic, this identification. These photos were all verified, of course, by call. So that's that's a hint of what's to come. We're really excited that we can identify willow alders with a pretty good confidence now, even if they're not calling. And we basically in volume 3 have laid out essentially these wing formula for all the other MPIDs as well. So stay tuned, and we again thank you very much for having us here. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. And if you have some photos that you want us to identify, I think someone mentioned that they had some mystery photos. We're happy to discuss them as well. So thank you very much.
Good stuff, guys. That was great. While we're waiting to see if anybody else has any questions, we had a good year this year for Eastern wood pewee in California. And I suggested to a number of folks that may have been due in no small part to the fact that you did such a good treatment of it in volume 1, which was out in 2023, and that people just had a better sense of what they were looking for this year. So I wonder if anybody had weighed in on that.
I think you had some alder this spring, right? Alder Flycatcher at Point Loma. Was it Paul Lehman that found that one? But at least I heard that you guys had an alder.
Paul here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi,
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, long time no see. Anyway, yeah, we had with our first county record of Eastern wood pewee, we ended up with at least 2 or more. Of course, I was part of a mini invasion to California this year. We had this potential alder flycatcher. The record's been submitted to the CBRC. It was the first week of June. Perfect time for an alder, but it also perfect time for a willow. So the question is, it was unfortunately silent. It was present for hours and hours and hours, and we absolutely could not get it to call. So I'll look at the photos again, see if they're detailed enough that you could maybe see primary spacing. And then if in case there's any hope, I'd like to send it to you for comment.
I think you can. We looked at the photos of that bird.
Yeah.
It's perfectly for order.
Oh, you already did look at, okay. I don't know if Tom
Yeah, we
Benson
looked at
sent
it.
them to you for
No,
comment.
I think we were just curious because, when you want to, so then we looked at that. 'cause
Yeah.
it
Oh,
looks like
okay.
an order.
So
And then
you sure you've seen photos? So I don't
mean,
need to send them to you, or should I do it?
There seemed to be a lot on eBird, and there were some
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there
good
are.
ones. There were some pretty good ones, and we were obviously curious because it obviously looks like an order, but
Yeah.
it was a nice relief to see that it also had the primary spacing that
Oh,
fit.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
We're pretty confident that it was an alder. Yeah.
So a comment, just one quick question. So in the primary spacing and stuff, can you make a comment about, obviously Eastern willows are tougher to separate from alder than the Western type willows, and that was the problem with our bird and a lot of birds in California. You have any comment on Eastern willows and how one might be able to separate them out?
Yeah, I guess the Eastern willows, I think the confusion is that they're not as long-billed as your Western willows. So I think that's where it is tough. But in all our measurements, we found that it's I couldn't see any obvious difference between Eastern and the different Western willow subspecies in the primary tip spacings. So I think it should work out. In fact, I think at least 50% of my willow measurements were from the east. So it checks out pretty well.
What was just maybe your sample size again was how many hundred? I mean, was it 300?
We were like 377 for willows and sorry for willows 377 and alders was 250 or so. We did more willows because we were worried about subspecies variation.
And then we tested it on 100.
That's right.
Birds based on range only to make sure that we were not using misidentified photos, and we got the same results on those photographed birds as well as the specimens.
It's very interesting that after we've done this in Texas, I think, or East Texas to Upper Texas coast, the migratory patterns of impids is quite confused, because even yellow-bellied, we've got it confused, but certainly willow and alder, we've been thinking willows are passing through East Texas in the fall commonly, but now that we know, we're paying much more close attention. We're finding that it's really dominated by alders, and that the willows really migrate more west of, say, Houston, more west of East Texas. So I think there's going to be a lot of new understanding of flycatcher movements, at least in the eastern parts of the United States.
Who's got a question? I know Shar was looking for a photograph. I don't know if she dug that up, but who else has
No, I didn't. So I'm gonna have to pass on that.
I should mention, the primary tip spacings, you have